Hey team, how's it going? David here, and welcome into another episode of Quarantine Catch Up. Today I have a very special guest, practically my neighbor here in the Charlotte area. I've talked to folks in California and Texas and Washington State, but I'm so pleased to have someone right around the corner here in Charlotte, Trish MacDonald, Director of Global Mobility with Westinghouse. Trish, how are you doing today?
I'm good, David. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Thanks so much for joining me.
Yep.
I know that we were talking earlier before I hit the record button, and I told you that, one of the reasons I wanted to start this is to, one, stay in touch with people, get to know people maybe that I've only met once or twice or just known for a year or two, something like that. But this is really cool because, you actually might be one of the people in mobility, in relocation that I've known the longest. I was just a young 23-year-old, punk kind of starting out in the industry when you let me into your office there all those years ago. And we've kind of had a relationship since then. And it's been great. So thank you so much for, allowing me to continue to come spend some time with you.
Yeah, you're very welcome. It's a pleasure, as always.
Awesome. Well, okay, Trish, so you have mentioned you have seen the show before. We always start with the Fast Five. So 5 lighthearted questions. Yeah, don't be too intimidated. They're not too bad. Okay, good. So 5 lighthearted questions, just aimed at getting to know you a little bit better, letting the audience kind of get a peek into Trish and what makes you tick. So are you ready for the Fast Five?
Do it.
All right, bring it on. Okay, so number 1, and I'm looking up at my screen here. Number 1, I've asked this a couple of people. I think it's kind of an interesting question, gives us an idea of your personality. If you're writing an autobiography of your life, the life of Trish MacDonald, what is the title of that book?
Oh, could have lots of titles, David.
It could be it could fill up the whole cover.
Yeah. No, I think the title I would pick is "It's Not About Luck."
Okay. Can you expand
on that? Because my or some of my career progression and spending time overseas. Going from, of course, I'm not a native Charlottean, as we all know.
That's not a North Carolinian accent.
No. So, having born and raised in Scotland and left there when I was 21 or 22, living in Asia, coming to the US, living the American dream. So a lot of people say you're so lucky, but actually my response is always, it's not about luck. It's about the path that you pave for you and your family and the perseverance and the hard work that you put into things. So I think a good title for me would be it truly is not about luck.
I love that. Very profound too. I think, the old adage, the harder you work, the more opportunities, the luckier you become, right? So
absolutely.
That's awesome. That's a great answer. I love that, Trish. Okay, number 2, moving on to number 2. You've had a couple international assignments.
Yeah.
Would you ever be up for another international assignment? And if so, what would, kind of the parameters, what would entice you to do that,
Yeah. So yes, I would. I loved my international experience in China. Although it was tough. It was a very, very difficult role because I had a dual role. I was still head of mobility for the Shaw Group at the time. And I was also playing an HR operations role in China, and I was traveling to 3 different locations, Shanghai, Sannan, and Haiyan, and they're not close to one another. So there's a lot of travel, and I had 2 young kids and a husband. So that was definitely a challenge for me. But if I had to choose a location, I would say somewhere in Europe. Although I was born and raised in Scotland and have traveled somewhat throughout Europe, I haven't really seen a whole lot of Europe. And also I would be closer to my immediate family. So my parents, my sister, my husband's family live in Scotland. So selfishly, to be close to them for a period of time would be fabulous.
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, great. Okay, number 3. All right, are you familiar with, this is one of the more lighthearted questions. Are you familiar with would you rather questions?
Yes.
Okay, so either this or that. So
yeah.
if you had one day where you were granted a superpower, Trish, okay, for one day, would you rather be able to fly or would you rather be able to make yourself invisible?
Ooh, invisible. I don't think so. Why would you want to be invisible? That sounds quite deceitful.
Well, I don't know. That could
Eye
say
on the
a
wall,
lot about
hiding. Um,
conversations you want to hear about, things like that. I guess.
I would have to say fly, although I'm scared of heights.
Okay. Okay.
But I
So
would,
at a very low altitude, I guess.
yeah, fly at a low altitude.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Good answer. I like that. Okay. Moving right along. All right. Number four. Another, not serious, but more of, a thoughtful question, I guess. Number four. Not necessarily your favorite book that you've ever read, but
Yeah.
if you had to give a book as a gift
Yeah.
to someone, what would that book be?
Um, so growing up and going through college and just starting my career, I wish I had read some motivational books or some books on life lessons and what to look out for and when you go into the big wide world. So I think I would probably give my daughter the Rachel Hollis. It's a fairly light-hearted book, Girl Wash Your Face,
Hmm.
but there's also some great motivational tips in that book that I think really every girl should read.
Okay.
And it really, she talks about her successes and her failures,
Hmm.
and just being you. So I think that would be a book that I would give to my 16-year-old now, venturing off to college or going out to the
I
big
love
world.
that. I love that, and the point that you make as far as her talking about her failures too.
Yeah. Yes.
This day and age, the age of social media and Instagram and everything, it's like, it's like a highlight reel, whatever your life is, and
Right.
people don't really see the challenges that you've gone through, the failures that you went through. I think
Learn from that.
any form of success, is going to
Yeah.
come as a result of failing,
Correct.
multiple times. But
I know. I hate that. There's a saying, failure is not an option. I hate that. Failure is, as long
yeah,
as you learn from it.
right. A learning opportunity for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So number five of the fast five, last question, and this is the more deep dive question for you,
Ooh,
Trish. Okay, this is digging deeper.
okay.
Right?
All
So,
right.
okay, so you're you're having a dinner party, and you can invite three other people to join you for your dinner party. The kicker is it can be anyone,
Mm-hmm.
any type of celebrity, any type of athlete or business
Okay.
leader, but then can be anyone throughout the history of time. So dead
Okay.
or alive,
All right.
three people that you would want to have dinner with.
Ooh, I would say I would invite a bunch of artists. So I would say I love Freddie Mercury from Queen.
Yeah.
So I would absolutely invite Freddie.
He could sing and play.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's great. Good thinking.
A good time there, I think.
Yeah.
I would also invite Amy Winehouse.
Oh, wow.
Love Amy.
Yeah.
And I would invite, just for my husband, because he likes some older music, Dean Martin.
Okay.
So I think I'd invite some artists, and I think we'd have a really good, maybe not a good dinner party, but maybe a good jamming session.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. So you kind of added that onto the dinner party. That's smart thinking. I like that.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much eating would go on. Maybe lots of drinking and
Yeah, maybe.
party.
Maybe. That's great. Well, thanks, Trish. I appreciate you indulging me in those questions. That was awesome. I'd love to dig in a little bit, and you mentioned it earlier during one of your answers, but you've had a couple international assignments. Obviously, you're not originally from the States. Originally from Scotland. Tell us a little bit about how did that opportunity? Did you go straight from Scotland to Hong Kong?
Yes, I actually did. And the clock was ticking. And when I say the clock was ticking is Hong Kong was handing back to China in 1997.
Right. Yeah.
July 1st. So in 1996, when I finished college, I said to my then boyfriend, who's now my husband, let's go to Hong Kong because his sister lived there and lived there for a very long time.
Huh.
So the opportunity, when you have family there, of course, it's a whole lot easier.
Yeah.
So we only had a year before Hong Kong was being handed back to China. So we decided, you know what, let's just go for it. So we sold you know, the few things that we had, the car, the stereo system, you know, whatever, because we didn't live together at that point. We were both living at home with our parents. So we thought about it and thought about it, and I always had a burning desire to go to Asia. It always intrigued me. So finally convinced him, you know, because he had been before. He had lived that life somewhat. So he said, okay. I said, look, if it doesn't work out, as my dad's words, my dad said, if it doesn't work out, you can always come home. So why don't you try?
Yeah.
So my mom was not for it, but my dad certainly said, no, go. It's only a ticket back. So we did. So we went from Scotland to Hong Kong. And
so no job lined up.
No.
Did you have a place to live? Were you going to live with your future sister-in-law, I guess? Or?
Yes. We stayed with her.
Oh, cool.
And
have
I
tell you met her before that?
I had, yes. Okay. Yes. I didn't know her very well. We got to know one another, of course, as when I got there, but I did not know her very well prior to that.
Okay. Well, what a great way to know each other by with each other. I'm sure, and in Hong Kong, I've had some good friends that have lived there for a few years. My wife and I, we went and visited them. This was several years ago, but you know, real estate is a hot commodity in Hong Kong. It generally goes up, right? So I'm sure the living quarters probably wasn't too big. So I'm sure you guys got to know each other really well.
700 square feet, yes.
Wow. Yeah, there you go. So how did so you moved to Hong Kong, and are you just like, you know, I just want to get any job that will pay me, or are you looking for something specific? You know, what did you study in school? You know, what did that look like?
Yeah. So I studied business administration. One piece of great advice my mom always gave me was, because you know, you don't know what you want to do when you grow up, right? Sure. So my mom always said, if you have no idea, you just do a general business degree.
Right. Good background.
Yeah. Yes. So that's exactly what I did. And later on, I went back and studied human resources. So, but that wasn't until I was in my 40s. So crazy as that sounds. So anyway, after college, so doing business administration, we got there, not really know. We were actually going to go to Australia. We decided, you know what, we're only going to spend 6 months in Hong Kong, and we're going to go on to Australia.
Wow. So you're
I have
farther away.
Yeah, I have family in Australia, so we thought, you know, we really want to go there. So anyway, so we really didn't have any jobs in mind, fresh, you know, out of school. But my sister-in-law had, you know, connections. So my husband had a few jobs initially, not the greatest. I did too. I did a few temp roles. Oh, they were awful. It was just horrible. And at one point we decided, you know what, maybe we won't make it. Maybe we won't get to Australia. Maybe we're going to go home.
Yeah.
And I was sick a lot because of the pollution. You know, the environment is very different in Hong Kong, and there certainly is a lot of pollution. And then just the culture was very different. The food, the water, everything. So I was fairly sick. So I, you know, there was that piece of it, and then not finding the right role, but it just took some resilience and some perseverance. And I think we were maybe 4 or 5 months in when my husband landed a project coordinator role with the curtain wall company. They were building all the skyscrapers and doing all the exterior glass in Hong Kong, you know, those lots of high-rise buildings. And then I ended up landing a role with Buena Vista Home Entertainment, and absolutely loved that role. So that role for me lasted a year, and I was in operations, nothing to do with global mobility. So what I was doing, it was actually a really cool role. I was in manufacturing and distribution. So I was processing and project managing the distribution of Laserdisc. Oh my God.
Can you explain to the audience what a Laserdisc is? No, I'm kidding.
A huge DVD.
I remember those. Yeah, I remember those. And those did they last very long?
No. We went from Laserdisc to VCDs, which didn't last long because the quality was the Laserdisc quality was very good.
Yeah.
But the VCD quality was appalling. And so I immediately jumped to DVDs from there.
I remember in my neighborhood, kid they got a laser disc, player. And didn't you have to, it was almost like a
You
record.
had to,
Yeah,
the record.
halfway through you had to turn it over.
Yes, you had to turn it over.
Yeah. I was like, this
Yep.
is wild. I was like, what happened to your VHS player? And anyone over
Yeah.
the age of 35, though not gonna, or excuse me, under the age
yeah.
not gonna know what a VHS player is probably.
So I still have all of my laser discs that were
that's great.
And my laser disc player. Yes. Yes. So I landed that role. Loved it, but unfortunately after 1 year Disney decided to close down those operations and move them back to Burbank, California. So they closed the operations. My husband was still thriving in his role, and I ultimately worked for a consumer camera manufacturer, Concord Camera, who produced all of these single-use cameras that you find in Walgreens and CVS, etc. And so they were producing those in Shenzhen. So I ultimately ended up in a administration manager role, and the majority of their employees were locally hired, so from Hong Kong, but they brought in these foreigners. So I was one of them, although I was a local hire.
Right.
But they had all these leaders come from Florida, where the headquarters was. So because of the language barrier, the onus was on me to find out how we become legally compliant in Hong Kong with bringing in these foreigners. So hence my global mobility role evolved, because they didn't know how to handle the taxes. We had to handle the immigration, and nobody quite knew how to do that. So by default, because the communication barrier, I became that person and really had no clue what I was doing.
Right.
Learning as I go.
So really, like kind of just thrown into it.
Yes.
Figure it out. I mean, sometimes, that is the best way to learn, is to like just jump in head first and make mistakes and say, okay, I'm not going to do that again. That didn't work. Okay. And interesting. So, okay. So you kind of take on this global mobility role that you did not even know was a global mobility role. Right?
Nope.
So, okay. So, you're in Hong Kong. At that point, do you start to gain, interest in, mobility and immigration and that sort of thing? Or you're just kind of like, hey, this is the job, let's just get it done, and this is what I'm doing for now?
Yes, exactly that. Because I had a much larger role. That was just a tiny piece. So at that point, I didn't think that this would be a full-time job and something I really wanted to pursue. It wasn't until my boss at the time, who was based in Hong Kong, he was the MD, he was asked to return to headquarters in Hollywood, Florida. And when he was there, I'd say 2-3 months, he called me and said, I need you here. We have no human resources function, so I need you here to build the team in the department. So I said, oh, okay. So had a conversation with my husband. We're 6 years into Hong Kong at this point.
Yeah.
And said, hey, Brian, my boss, wants me to go to Hollywood, Florida. It's like, oh, so because really we were happy in Hong Kong.
Yeah. And you got married in Hong Kong, or?
No, we said, okay, yeah, we'll go. So guess what? Oh, we have a problem. Immigration, U.S. immigration, you're not married. So that would mean 2 sponsors.
Yeah. And
my husband, some people again say this is luck. My husband approached his current employer, said that we're actually leaving. Sorry, but we're heading to Florida. And they said, oh, we need someone in Miami.
Wow.
So, but we didn't want to go through 2 sponsorships. So guess what? We ended up getting married. It was myself, my husband, his sister, and a witness.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Mom was not happy, but we said we would have a wedding reception in Scotland. We didn't. We never did. So we ended up getting married, and then went through the the U.S. immigration sponsorship, and then we moved to Hollywood, Florida.
So when your 16-year-old daughter walks down the aisle, you say, hey, we only had 4 people at our wedding, so we don't have to have this big deal.
That's right.
That's funny. Okay, so you guys go to Florida, and really with I guess your role was the catalyst for it, right? To go to Florida.
Yes, it was. Like
you said, luck, maybe not, but it works out where your husband came to Florida with his role as well. I mean, Was there any apprehension as far as, gosh, we liked Hong Kong. Did you have in the back of your mind, like, well, what about Australia? I thought we were going to, or was that totally gone? You're like,
On,
yeah, okay.
on, and we were excited about coming to the United States because my husband has a sister here. I have an aunt here, right here in Charlotte.
Oh, great.
Yeah, she was in Florida at the time, so we both came to Charlotte at the same time.
Okay.
So we were excited about that.
Yeah.
And the role was
a new opportunity, a new place to live, and yeah.
Yes. So I was working in Hollywood. My husband was working in Miami. So it worked out really well. Really enjoyed the time. I learned a lot because now I'm in a full-blown human resources role, wearing all the hats because the company wasn't so large.
Okay.
And that's where I got introduced to more into the role of global mobility. They had operations in Canada, in the UK, France, and Germany. And I was ultimately responsible for those regions as well.
And was it just that the program wasn't very large, and so it didn't necessarily have to have its own mobility, program, or just like, in the early stages, and they said, well, Trish kind of knows what she's doing on the mobility part. Let's just give that to her. How did that kind of come to fruition?
So the company was very small, 100 or so employees in the US. So there was no need to have a global mobility function. So again, it all fell under the human resources umbrella. And they didn't have a lot of international assignments or permanent transfers. But again, it was just understanding the rules in these other countries. And it was more of the employment law piece. So that, again, just whetting the appetite for, other areas within global mobility, because we talk about global mobility, we a lot of times don't talk about the employment law piece of it, which is very important. So I gained a lot of experience in that area. Immigration, my own personal case, I gained a lot of knowledge of coming into the United States and how that worked in my own relocation from Hong Kong to Florida, which I, of course, managed.
Right.
So,
I'm going through that firsthand, and so you can really empathize with employees that are moving around the world. Say, hey, I've gone through this myself.
Yes.
So where did the kind of transition, and we might be skipping ahead a little bit, but what was the transition where it was just full on mobility?
Yep. So that's when I moved to Shaw. So that's when we moved to Charlotte. So that was back in 2007.
So we must have met 2008.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So were you had that opportunity come up? Were you actively searching for a new role, or?
So my husband was headhunted to Charlotte to build the Duke Energy Center. They needed someone to install all of that beautiful glass.
Yeah, beautiful building.
So yes, my husband was headhunted because, with the international experience in curtain wall. So he was hired by the company who was contracted to perform that work. So his role brought us to Charlotte. And I was then actively seeking employment. So I went for an interview at Shaw and ended up being their global mobility manager. So that was my full-time dedicated role.
And do you think, your experience and kind of your background of, managing a program almost like, grassroots or like guerrilla style, like an informal program where you're kind of doing everything yourself. Do you think that helped you, to get that role with the Shaw Group?
Absolutely. And having the international exposure, because they were embarking on, significant work in China on the China AP1000 project, which is actually, interestingly enough, was a consortium with Westinghouse. So they really wanted someone that had that international exposure and experience.
That totally makes sense. And so so you break into, mobility kind of full time now. In the relocation space. And you really, Trish, have been, a leader within our industry. I know that you were on the board, you're president of CMARC, Charlotte Metro Area Relocation Council, one of the ERC regional groups.
Yes.
And, what kind of clicked for you as far as, this is a career, this is an industry this is a group of people, a network that I want to invest in?
Every day is a new day in mobility, and I love that. I love the challenges that we have every day. I mean, I was learning when we're still learning, in fact, today. But I was very much green into mobility, I would say, when I joined in 2007 or 8. I think I joined Shaw in 2008. So it was it was a difficult learning curve because the larger projects like the China AP1000 was in full swing. But I love to travel. It's a passion of mine. And I feel like I'm traveling every day when I'm working in mobility, because you're dealing with so many people with so many in so many different countries and different cultures. And I really, really enjoy that. So I think back then, I knew that this was my passion. And I wouldn't change that. In fact, I just had the conversation recently with my boss, and she said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" I said, I'm here. Yeah. I love being in mobility. I really don't have a passion to say, again, I've worked in all operations. I've worked on the other side of HR, in different functions. I've worn all the hats and been in comp and benefits and HR operations. And so I love mobility. And I just love the fact that we deal with the world, every day, and the nuances that come with that.
Yeah, absolutely. We're running up our time just a little bit, Trish, but just to kind of close our conversation, I'd love to get your thoughts on, because as I mentioned, you're president of CMARC.
Yes.
As a corporate, and we talked about this a little bit off camera, I think that's the main challenge for all these regional groups. I'm a part of the Houston group, HRP, and I think that's a challenge for all of the groups is, how do we get more corporate attendance, more corporate engagement? Maybe a two-parter for you. One, what was the kind of initiative for you? What was the motivation for you to be on the board and ultimately be president? Because that's, I was VP last year, and just being on the board is, it's a commitment.
It is.
And it takes time and it takes effort. So one, what was the motivation for you? And then two, what do you think we do, and who knows what that kind of looks like in the immediate future, but eventually when we do get back together, what do you think is important as far as getting more corporates? What can we do to get more corporate engagement?
Yeah. So I think the motivation for me was to network more with my peers. And there were some corporate attendees when I joined CMARC many years ago. But so it was really an opportunity for me to network locally here in Charlotte, and not just with my peers, but also with the service providers that were at the meeting. I think one of the deterrents that corporate attendees feel is they feel like they might get hounded by, for new business by service providers, and I feel like that I think CMARC do a really good job of communicating that that's not why we're here.
Right.
And I certainly don't feel that way at all when I attend CMARC. I don't.
I was just going to ask. We don't have too many names, of course, but has that ever happened to you where you felt
happened, but it's happened, but very few. Okay. But that's okay. That is okay. If it was happening every single meeting, then maybe I would have a different outlook on that. But I really feel like that's not the case. And most people that are at CMARC are there for the same goals that the corporate attendees are there for. And that's to network and to, get educated with the educational sessions.
Right.
So I think strategically, CMARC made a very good decision to have more corporate attendees on the board.
Right.
Because I think prior, a few years ago, it was made up primarily of service providers.
Mm-hmm.
But gradually over time, that's changed significantly at CMARC. And I think that was a very, very good decision. Because it's much easier for me to call on my peers and say, hey, come to CMARC.
Right. I think so. And I think hopefully that's an encouragement.
It is.
To the corporate side to say, hey, okay, Trish with Westinghouse is on the board. Okay, cool. There must be value in that. And so, hopefully I'll attend more meetings.
Yes, do.
I like it. I like it. Awesome. Well, Trish, thank you so much for joining me today. I really do appreciate it. I do have to say, you probably have the best background of anyone I've talked to so far. So I love the trees and everything going on there. So
Our office can be anywhere, David.
yes, yes. Awesome. Well, for Trish MacDonald, I'm David Bunnell. Thanks so much for catching up.
Thank you.